Yeah, yeah. So we had a question on the chat screen that talks about does the parent where does the parent server sit, does it sit does the parent system sit on a single server or multiple servers in the client's domain? So if you can just answer that question,
right?
And then after that, Kanan Ajmera, I've unmuted you, but we can't seem to hear you. So if you can just put in your question on the question screen, we'll be able to answer that as well. So Bill, why don't you go ahead and answer the question?
So in a demo environment, or if you're just doing one database, all of this can reside on a single server. But as you start to scale up, then you want to start distributing components to allow it to have adequate resources. So the first thing you would do is you would separate the metadata repository itself onto a separate server, so that you've got one for the database and one for the application server. You can still run your habitats on that application server if you chose to, but the next level of scaling up is to say, well, I really want to add more resources to do more in parallel, so you can add more servers to run habitats on. And so that's generally how a single system scales up. But if you really want to get large, then that's the point where you start adding child servers. And in that case, you're generally running a child system on a particular server. It's got its habitat, it's got its own embedded database. These typically use Derby as their embedded database, whereas in a parent system you'd use Oracle as your primary server. But as it scales these up, it's just cookie cutter deploying new instances of the entire system.
Bill, there's another question that says, how does it work to scan complete data in the case of a billion record table?
That's a good question. So there are different agents within the system are performing different functions. So if you just imagine trying to get a row count on a billion row table, that particular query can take a while, or if it's getting that from, depending on the database, sometimes that's in metadata within the database. But every operation it's performing has different performance characteristics, and so some of it for a billion row table will take quite a long time. What we find, though, is that it's a distribution where in large enterprises you generally have most of your tables tend to be under 100,000 rows, and then it'll start to ramp up, and you'll have a few extremes that are on the billion row level, which we've profiled before. But most of them tend to be much smaller than that.
Yeah, Bill, if I can add something to that. So the idea here is that global IDs will get a full understanding of anything that contains reference data, master data, code data, etc. So any non-transaction data table is fully analyzed, and usually those tables are in the order of 10, 20 million, right? So we're able to fully analyze them. In the case of transaction records, which are in tables which have billions of records, we take a sample, right? We say that as long as we understand 10 million records, we can pretty much predict what the rest of the table is going to look like. So we don't do full analysis of billion row tables. We do the profiling and shape collection for, let's say, 10 million rows. And then when we do data quality, then we do it exhaustively on the whole transaction table. Right. So hopefully, okay. So that's a good question, Bill. There's a number of requests for the API discussion, and I think that would be very interesting.
Okay.
But before we do that, let me just make sure we answer the other question. Mr. Thomas Dijan Thomas asked this question: can we support it on Excel or any readable doc? So yes, we do support most formats. Excel definitely, and if the only thing that we don't have like full support for is something that cannot be converted into a tabular or columnar structure. Right? So if you have a sort of pure text file, right, that cannot be converted into a tabular or columnar structure, then of course, it is not made up of semantic domains, and so the software cannot work with it. We can, of course, Lucene index it, search inside it, find patterns inside textual information, but it's not tabular columnar. So generally, Global IDs works with tabular columnar, which means all forms of XML, JSON, anything that's in any database environment, etc. Right? So Hive, HBase, HDFS, Avro. So we have broad coverage. Bill, maybe you can just show all the coverage screens while I'm talking in terms of the application scanners that we have. One more question that that was asked was, can we? How is the cleansing mapped to data quality? Let me just answer. How is cleansing mapped to the quality? Like any cases are opened, and once the DQ is fixed, the cases get closed. So I think what the audience is asking, the question that is being asked is, can we do issue management related to all the cases that are open for data cleansing? And the answer is yes. So we have a issue management capability inside the software that allows us to look at issues that are created by any rule violations and the ability to see if those issues are getting closed or not. Right? So that capability does exist. I think we've answered all the questions related that have come through, Bill, except the ones related to the API. So maybe you can spend the rest of the time going through the API.